the run run down the side of the entrance of the Spaceball One, and then swing the camera around to get the bill. We break for nobody billboard at the end,
Oh, right. Yeah, yeah.
and was getting the timing on that thing.
That's right. Because that model was half the length of the stage. The big one. It was huge.
Yeah, 15 feet.
Something like that. I mean, it was, and the passes were so long. And what's great is they just introduced these VHS recorders that could record single frame. So you could do test moves without shooting RAR film and waiting for it to be developed and waiting for the moviola to be free and all that, just to check moves. And we used it. We had like some 12-hour passes. We watched the entire Star Wars trilogy, Star Wars, Empire, and Jedi, during one of these passes, like back to back. Not only that, but especially because Dave worked on Jedi.
We lit it, and Peter came in, looked at it, and basically, yeah, go with that. And
yeah, I mean, there's the standard, there's the 2001 lighting, which is no fill, realistically depicting outer space. And there's Star Wars lighting where, the ships also have sound. So you're giving it realism anyway. I mean, just that opening shot was at least a month, if I remember correctly.
You get all the elements for the opening shot. I think that was, assuming everything went right, I want to say 2 work days, because that was one where we never turned the rig off.
Right. There was the beauty pass, the lights pass, I think the engine pass was separate. And then we had to wind down and move the rig down and make sure we're in sync to get just that last bit for the engine. And then the reverse blue screen. So there were 4 passes, and each was like, I remember being like 12 hours. Maybe and a couple of times we'd come in, after shooting 3 passes and check the rig, and it was off its mark for some reason, and we'd have to start over. During an internal lights pass, the model melted. And they were like neon light tubes or fluorescents or something that was really hot. And we started to smell something.
Remember the part of the model catching fire.
Yes, we started to smell something, go, that doesn't smell good. And then I think we brought Grant in, and he goes, everybody out. Yeah, it did catch fire. And we actually evacuated the whole building, opened up all the doors, the roll-up doors and stuff, because it was cyanoacrylate. Cyano as in cyanide.
Yeah,
that was burning.
I still remember Grant saying that if it smells bad, it probably is. Yeah. Everybody out, and they threw us out for the day because we didn't have a shot to shoot.
Yeah. I seem to remember it somehow burned the side away from the camera, though, so we kept shooting. Or did it burn the top? It burned some.
I think it burned the top.
Yeah. So the Butterflex on stage 2 was removed, and Dick Alexander and Bill Short, probably with designs by Don Trimble, built a cage for Doug Freeze on R35. That's what they were, Doug Freeze R35?
Yes.
4-perf. And yes, we were at like on a 20 mil lens at f22, and we still couldn't hold focus. Because I seem to remember the rig being like that close to the model when it was raking by. It was
close. I don't remember how, but it was close. And that's part of the problems we had with holding focus on that thing.
But when we weren't in focus, Peter Donovan said, we'll just change the circle of confusion on your calculator.
Yes,
and it'll be in focus. And we're like, what, Peter? I mean, I love Peter, but that was like, what? Just change the depth of the circle of confusion. That doesn't.
Yeah, you change it enough times, and hey, you're in focus.
And then someone said, there's this Nikon. I remember it being a 55, a specialized 55, but the front element tilted up. It's for architectural.
Yeah, it wasn't exactly a tilting lens, but you could shift it.
Right.
And it was for architecture. Originally, the model was bigger. I don't know if you remember that, Steve. They had some pipe sections.
Oh, yeah, right.
About 2 feet in the middle of the model. And you'd hit that section on the flyby, and all of a sudden, it had just turned into a snooze fest.
Right. Yeah, that's right. It was built on like a tube in the center, and sections slid on. That's right. They built it in sections. But there was another thing that happened. I don't know if you remember this, Dave. Something we didn't notice, that I think it was like the first time we did the full shot, even though it wasn't all in focus, just past those little wing things at the front. there's this Roman orgy scene in like a bas relief on the side of the ship. The Nernies and it's we didn't see it until it was there on the screen, full screen.
You couldn't miss it.
You couldn't miss it. It was the craziest orgy scene of Nernies I've ever seen. And I think Peter Donnan said something like, I don't think Mel would like that or something. So if you watch the finished movie, when I think it's right past the wings, I could be wrong, but there's a section of the ship where all of a sudden it goes kind of dark. And that was a series, Dave put up a series of flags and dots and things to block the light out from that so you couldn't really see it.
The model makers, it's not just on Spaceballs.
Yeah.
Then Craig Jean did one for Close Encounters. I'm going on to another movie. The top of Devil's Tower has like a pond in it with a guy in a boat with a fishing line and a shark fin circling around the boat.
Right. Yeah, because I don't remember seeing it on the model. I just remember seeing it on the big screen. It's like, oh.
And they had to respray the ship with the fluoro paint. You couldn't see it, but it would fluoresce under the black lights.
Right.
And you had to do that every so often because the paint would just lose its intensity and have absolutely no poop at all to get an exposure.
Yeah. That's also why we had some very long passes for the reverse blue screen. You only get so much light out of a black light. Anytime you get the camera that close, I mean, we hit the model so many times that the model makers made these drawings. You know how like World War II, a fighter pilot, they have like 6 kills, will have the painted airplane on the side of the airplane, right? With an X through it or something. Well, they made these Spaceball One drawings on paper with an X through them and would stick it to the side of the motion control card every time we hit the model. And we had like 6 of those.
Oh, yeah.
There was one time I remember actually, we just started the day and you said something like, okay, let's, fire up the computer. And I touched the keyboard and a spark shot out of my finger, hit the keyboard, and the rig started going right toward the model. Right. And I remember having to run across the stage to unplug the drivers before it hit. And Dave would always send me in to say, oh, so I'd be the one where they'd go, okay, what'd you do now? And I'd say, well, Dave hit the model. We did the Megamaid.
Yep.
And we may have done some of the Mercedes, actually. I'm trying to remember. I know Glenn and Doug definitely did some of those. The Megamaid hand tumbling, the head tumbling.
Yeah, that we did.
And then, of course, everybody was in the parking lot when we blew it up.
I'd like to get out there with a large miniature and basically film it and blow it up. Steve, correct me if I'm wrong. I think the Winnebago was on wires when they flew it into the sand dunes.
Oh yeah, that was
They didn't just take it and throw it.
No. It was supposed to hit the sand dune right there. I mean, it hit its mark. I just didn't hit mine. But the wires were so thin, and they didn't have wire removal back then. You don't see them. You don't see the wires on the side angle, or I mean, there's a lot of spray painting and dulling and stuff to get the wires to disappear, but they did. We had multiple cameras, like 2 or 3. I was at the camera pointing straight at the model, where the Winnebago comes right at the camera. First of all, focus pulling was never my strong suit. So I was on a 55 mil Nikon. This Nikon went from like 1 foot to infinity so the combination of pointing straight at this Winnebago, coming the distance at the camera, hitting the sand dune in the front, a lens not made for focus pulling, and me, the world's worst focus puller. If you watch that movie, that we went to dailies, and that Winnebago coming at the camera is like, I mean, completely soft. I mean, you don't even see any hint of a Winnebago until right at the end. And if you watch the movie, the little bit they use, you see it just come out of focus into focus and hit. That was the only part that was in focus. The other 90% of the shot was completely soft. So they used the side angle. And the other shot where they did, I remember this, I loaded the camera for this. It was the escape pods coming out of the Spaceball cruiser.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd always wondered in Star Wars, right, when R2-D2 and C-3PO go in the escape pod and it just jettisons, right? All it is they built a piece of miniature and had an escape pod, and then the camera pointed down, and they just dropped it onto a
Yeah.
onto a pad with cover and duvetine. That's all we did. But I just thought, I remember thinking, well, that's clever. There was just one, and they used the shot over and over and over again. Yeah, it was a Mitchell at 120 frames looking straight down, and then it was like, oh no, there were little latches, I think, and solenoids, and they just go.
And they had I forget what the model makers put in. It was just something to give it some flecks of metal.
Oh yeah, right. There was some like glitter or something. There was something spraying. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Probably something toxic.
When Megamaid was just standing there, that was the complete Megamaid. It was what Steve was saying earlier about when Megamaid gets blown up and the head goes tumbling. That was a separate element. The arm.
Remember, there was the transition when it transitioned from the Spaceball
Oh,
Cruiser, Spaceball
yeah.
One, into the Megamaid. So yes, there were like 4 or 5 different sections that were different, that were separate, that kind of opened and transformed. So each of those shots was a different miniature for that transition. And then the final is the Megamaid. There was a cat that just showed up, and there was a commercial being shot for some store in the Midwest called Zaire, Zayre. And I think we named the cat Zaire.
Did Glenn Campbell take Zaire home?
He might have. Unlike us, Glenn was a good person. At Apogee, Doug, as an owner of Apogee, was the #1 cameraman. Glenn was the #1 assistant. Eric Peterson was #2 assistant. Usually John Sullivan was the #2 cameraman. I don't know why he didn't work on Spaceballs, but I was #3, and I think Eric said, "Oh, I can't work with Hardberger, so you do it." And so I got the job.
Yeah, because apparently I was very difficult and threw temper tantrums and tossed C-stands across the stage.
Easiest person in the world to work with, this guy. I mean, every show you start out and they go no overtime, and then you fall behind, and then it's like all overtime. I mean, it wasn't any worse or any better than any other show. We finished it well before the release. It wasn't like Dick Tracy, where I did the last shot 2 weeks before the release.
For the most part, everything went to plan, except for the ship catching on fire.
Mel and his editor were pretty decisive. I don't recall a lot of showing a finished shot and then having to go back to square one and start over.
No, I don't
I
recall any.
remember it was pretty efficient in that regard, that Mel was getting
Mel
what he
never
wanted,
showed up.
and if he liked it, he approved it. And there was one change. After everybody had been, we'd wrap, everybody had been let go. I get a call, probably from Craig Boyadjian, Peter Donan's assistant, and said, we need to redo the last shot of the movie. It's a shot of the Winnebago goes flying away with the just married bumper sticker on it, whatever it is. And I think everyone had left and gone on vacation. There was literally no camera person around. So they just said, do you want to go in and do it? I said, sure, I'll do it. So I went into stage one. We had the Winnebago set up on there, and it was supposed to be just a very straight shot of it going away and flying up. So I'm on the stage, and Peter Donan calls. And he said, he starts explaining the shot to me, because I didn't know at the time what the shot was supposed to be. And he's not being very clear. I'm not quite, I'd never done this before. I was an assistant. I wasn't a camera operator DP. I've watched it, but I've never done it. And Peter's explaining, I go, I'm sorry, I'm not getting it. He goes, hang on, I'm with Mel. Talk to Mel. And he hands the phone to Mel. Mel's on the phone. And Mel's like, right? He's explaining the shot very, his energetic way. I start laughing. He goes, the fuck are you laughing? I go, Mel, I'm sorry. You're funny. You cannot not be funny. And he goes, and he gives it back to Peter, and Peter goes, you got that? I go, yeah, Peter, I'll shoot something. Okay. Yeah, it all went pretty smoothly as an effects show can go.
From Mel, you never got the, I don't know. Show me something different.
Right.
Okay. I'll know it when I see it. That's the other one I always loved.
Or 13% faster. Okay. Peter was great. Peter Donan.
I like him.
He knew his stuff. Yeah, it wasn't an Apogee job. Peter got the job and then hired Apogee to do the effects. I look back at it fondly, but I still consider myself to be a recovering visual effects person. because most of the shows I worked on, not Spaceballs, was wonderful. And actually all the Apogee shows were wonderful. But after that, the trauma level was just off the charts.
Yeah.
One reason I left. It just because it's you get indecisive, abusive people above you, and it just makes the whole thing a nightmare. You lose the joy of actually doing the work. It would be Dykstra or Richard, dealing with the studio and the suits, right? And whatever effects producer or coordinator is with them, at least those guys could wave around an Oscar or two or three or four and go, just listen to me,
Yeah, and they acted as a buffer so that, there was like the shield wall. What I was going to say about the Apogee model shop, they kept most of the models and they had them on the walls, up in the ceiling. So it was kind of like going through a working model shop and a museum all at the same time.
Well, they had the X-Wing. Remember when I first walked in, they had the X-Wing fighter model in that plexiglass case in the lobby. I mean, I started as a driver at Apogee, and half my job was picking up stuff for Grant. He'd come into the purchasing department and go, go to Granger, and he'd pull out the big Granger book and go, here on page 873. I need 8 of those. He was always, what was great about Grant is he treated everyone the same. I was just the lowly driver. He treated me the same as he'd treat Dykstra. He was just a nice guy. And I could see why, looking back at him, he just was all about the work. That's why he probably didn't want to talk about it. He just said the work speaks for itself. He was a brilliant model maker, brilliant at running a shop. I think of all the model makers who were working for him, Pete Gerard and Mike Joyce and Susie Schneider and Tom Pock and Smokey Stover. Whatever happened to Smokey? Smokey was great. And John Eaves. All these, some of them were just like John Eaves started, I think his first model making job was at Apogee. It may have been even Spaceballs. It may have been Invaders from Mars, may have been Spaceballs. And then, these grizzled veterans like Mike Joyce, who worked on Terminator and others, they were just all, he was great at assigning people to their strength.
And the other thing I found, he would also listen to suggestions. And okay, example, it's the movie that Stallone is in. It's the fireball in the Holland Tunnel, daylight. He had some radio control cars and we were going to crash them. And I said, we're only using one camera. Shouldn't we have another one here? He said, oh, okay. So we cut a hole in the side of the tunnel and stuck a camera.
He always wear his apron that said Star Wars on it, like the patch, right? That said Star Wars. It's like, he did Star Wars. He doesn't need to justify anything. He did that.
But it was fun to work on. You'll talk to people and you'll say, blah, 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 Spaceballs, and their faces just light up.
Right. I know. I've been with Dave when that happens. I go, he also worked on Close Encounters and Blade Runner and Jedi. They'll go, oh, no, but Spaceballs.
Yeah. It's